Hello, class. Let me just get my screen sharing and we'll get right into it. So, today we're going to do a quick lecture on the lead up to the American Revolution. Uh, I think this is a neat period of time, but I think you probably think this period's really boring. You've heard about it probably a dozen times. This, that, the other thing, Paul Revere, the Declaration of Independence, drafting of the Bill of Rights. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how things led up to the American Revolution and what that looked like, and hopefully talk about some stuff you've never seen before. So, the biggest thing to remember leading up to the Revolution is that the 7 Years' War ended in 1763. The 7 Years' War was a gigantic war, started in America, but fighting took place for it all over the globe in all of the colonies of Britain, France, and Spain. Britain and France and Spain are the three major colonial powers at the time. So they are very strong and very influential, and they have massive empires at this point. And the 7 Years' War is going to change all that. The 7 Years' War is going to bring down both France and Spain. Britain wins. Britain wins hard. They take everything, basically. They don't get Louisiana, but nobody cares about Louisiana for now. But despite that, they spent a lot of money winning these wars. They took out loans from just people who had a lot of money in London. Governments worked very differently at this point in time than how we think of them today. So it's important to think about these are relying on the loans of individual powerful merchants in their capital cities. So they need to get their money back. They need their money back badly. And one of the other big things about the 7 Years' War is, like I said, it starts in America, Ohio, in fact. Hopefully Ohio is still a thing people make jokes about by the time I'm teaching. But it starts in Ohio because some really interesting Native Americans trick British colonists into fighting French people, thus kicking off a global war, which is an interesting chain of events, but we can't get into it. I'm sorry. So instead, we're going to talk about British liberty. So another thing that's important to think about is that at this point in time, the average British white man was real big on this idea that British citizens were provided a certain level of liberty. Liberty in this case, first and foremost, refers to the idea that people cannot take your stuff without you saying they can take your stuff. And the big thing that it's going to talk about is taxation. So the British liberty means that you can only be taxed with your consent. And the way that you consent is via your elected officials. If you vote to elect people, or you live in a place where they vote to elect people, then those elected officials are the only ones who are allowed to decide how much money you make, or how much money they're going to take from you. And that's really important. Also important to note, let's get to this quick. If you tax people without their consent, that's called stealing. And the British think of that as tyranny. Tyranny is a word you will hear a lot in this period of colonial history because it was big. It was just a word they liked using. Various reasons for that. So getting back to the idea of taxation with consent only, if elected officials are the ones who can tax people, they become very powerful in government. Now, this leads to an interesting thing. Because they are elected officials, these people are not directly controlled by the British government, also known as the Parliament and the Crown. The Crown is the royalty, and the Parliament is the major elected body in England itself. So in America, there are governors sent by the crown, the royalty, and those governors are supposed to be in charge of running the colonies. But what happens over an extended period of time is that the Crown's governors start to lose power. They lose power and influence because the elected officials who control taxation have all of the control. These guys are paying the governors like salaries, so they run the show. But when we go back, colonies are unpredictable. If colonies are unpredictable and you can't control the colonies with your governors, you're going to have a problem because the colonies can now just start doing stuff and you can't really stop them, which is really bad when you're a gigantic empire. So the British respond to that with the Hanoverian Reforms, a name we don't need to care about. The big thing to remember is that there were reforms between the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution, and they help cause the American Revolution. So Hanoverian reforms, the British Crown needs more money. They're broke. They're broke as you can imagine. They spent so much money winning that war, and now they got no money. So they need to get more money. They got all this cool stuff that they just took from France and Spain and their old American colonies that are still really important. So like they're gonna try to get more money out of them. So they're gonna bump the taxes. Taxes are going up. Important to note, American colonists pay way less in taxes than the people in London do, which is part of why they felt it was okay to increase the taxes. American colonists will not feel that way, as you already know. Another big thing, the Hanoverian reforms try to take away some of the independent diplomacy that the colonies have, because that's what started the 7 Years' War, and that was really expensive, and they don't want that to happen again, because they might not win the next one. So, and even more, they're also going to say the colonies are not allowed to expand west past the Appalachian Mountains. Now, I don't know if you've seen a map of the United States, you probably have, but the area east of the Appalachian Mountains is pretty small. It's just like a coast, basically. The vast majority of America is west of the Appalachians. So that's also going to bother people. So here we have three things. We have, as far as the American colonists are concerned, increased taxation is just straight up tyranny. It's just robbing them blind. Independent diplomacy is like more of a disruption of their status quo, and no more westward conquest is really going to get to their sense of entitlement to land in America, which is similar to an idea of manifest destiny we'll talk about later in the class. So leading up to the revolution, we got some things happening. This first one, Lord Dunmore's War, you've almost certainly not heard of. So the governor of Virginia in 1774 really didn't like that the crown was trying to say, you can't take more stuff west of the Appalachians. So he took stuff west of the Appalachians. He went to war with some Native Americans who were in the Kansas Territory and won. And he made them sign a treaty giving up Kansas. And he took that to the British, and the British was like, hey, you can't do that. We told you not to do that. That doesn't count. And colonists started to look at that as like they're trying to take away our rights and give them to the Native Americans, which the colonists did not like. There's something you're much more familiar with, the acts of civil disobedience. The acts of civil disobedience are going to be stuff like the Boston Tea Party. There's going to be things like burning down British ships. They're going to be like running tax collectors out of town. You've definitely heard of the Stamp Act, which is one of the parts of the Hanoverian reforms to increase taxation. What they do there is they just attack anyone whose job is like distributing those stamps, and then the British can't distribute any stamps, and the whole system just breaks. So those are the acts of civil disobedience. Pretty overt, like, disruption of the monarchy's intended results. And those are the committees of correspondence, where early American leaders are going to say, hey, we should do something about what the British are up to. And that includes dudes like Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, all of the founding fathers. Those are the committees of correspondence guys. There are two of those like events primarily. Yeah. And then the revolution happens, which is way more. This was a very short little lecture. I would love to spend half an hour talking about this, but we do not have time for that. So that is all for today. Have a great weekend.